Who is Sleep within the lore of Sleep Token? An eldritch god, a goddess of dreams, a narcissistic girlfriend, or maybe an aspect of Vessel's psyche? I'm going to try and answer these questions through a new series exploring the lore of Sleep Token. Using qualitative data analysis, I'll examine the overall themes discussed by the lyrics and other lore-related information to understand who this deity is and how Vessel relates to it. Some of this information may be familiar, and some may be new. Whether you agree with my conclusions or not, I hope you find my videos entertaining, and maybe learn something new about religion, philosophy, and esotericism, all of which I think are useful in understanding the story Sleep Token is trying to tell us. Today I'll be focusing on the lore around sleep, with subsequent videos exploring the role Vessel plays in the narrative, as well as other reoccurring themes throughout. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so you'll know when I post the next videos. Hello, I'm V. I've been a scientist for over 20 years, so obviously I had to overanalyze my new hyperfixation by putting all the lyrics in a spreadsheet and thematically code each one. If I was writing a manuscript on Sleep Token, I would need to recruit at least 2 other coders to validate my findings. Unfortunately, I don't have 2 friends who are insane enough to spend months coding 663 verses of nearly 5 hours of 55 Sleep Token songs. So if I overlook or misrepresent something, please kindly let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll try to update my Excel file and improve the accuracy for my future videos. I will also cite the sources in the description box below so you can go through and check it out for yourself. For my references outside of Sleep Token, I will primarily be using Wikipedia articles. Again, if I was being strictly academic about this, I would find primary sources. But seeing as I'm not publishing nor monetizing this, Wikipedia is going to have to do. In addition to the thematic analysis of the lyrics, I also documented the singing style that was used when singing those lyrics. Altogether, I noticed 13 distinct styles of singing that Vessel uses in his songs. At first, I treated them as if they were random. Then, as I looked at the overall themes and how the different singing styles overlap within the songs, I began to find evidence that these distinct voices were having a conversation with each other, going back and forth between different singing styles, discussing different perspectives about a situation. Because of this, I decided to assign various singing styles to each of the roles in the narrative. I assigned Vessel to his more normal singing voice range, with and without some distortion. To Sleep, I assigned his falsetto voice, whispers, and screaming, along with what I'm calling a legion of voices, when there are many voices singing at the same time. There are also occurrences where there are harmonies between Vessel's normal voice with the high falsetto or legion sounding voices. With those verses, I assign them as Vessel and Sleep singing together at the same time. Based on these assignments, I analyze the themes discussed from Vessel and Sleep's perspectives. In this video, I'm going to share with you new insights I discovered about Sleep through looking at the lyrics, interviews, interludes, and the comic book in its big picture context. I've also watched a few Sleep Token theory videos and have read some of the major articles discussing the common theories about the lore. But my conclusions are based on the evidence I found in the data along with my own interpretation of the story, not necessarily based on what the current consensus theories within the community are. It's not my intention to support or contradict any of the current theories. Instead, I've attempted to let the music speak to me and take me in a direction that makes narrative sense. So if I say anything you don't like, just know that we are all doing our best to interpret the story with the information we're given, keeping in mind that there isn't any canon answer to any of these questions. I'm simply presenting my interpretation based on my own biases, just like everyone else. Let me reiterate, your interpretation is just as valid as mine. That's the wonderful thing about art. It speaks to different people in different ways. Frankly, I'm just so excited to share with you my thoughts about Sleep Token, because my own friends and family are sick and tired of hearing about it. I need to get this information out of my head, so thank you for going on this journey with me. With that disclaimer out of the way, I have a lot of data to get through, so let's get started. Chapter 1. Sleep as an Ancient Deity. What we know for sure about the deity of sleep primarily comes from Vessel's early interviews across 6 articles from 2017 through 2019. Glen Joseph Robinson did a great video deep diving into all of these, and you can find a link to that video in the description box below. Overall in these interviews, we learn that Sleep is one of the oldest gods, he is everywhere at all times, he is everyone and he is you, and Sleep isn't his real name. It's just what Vessel calls him, because his real name can't be translated. This description of Sleep is similar to a Neoplatonic view of God, as a godhead beyond a nameable god. It's something so transcendent that it could never be understood, yet all existence comes from it and is connected to it. There are also many references to the Greek pantheon in some of their songs, so this philosophy and mythology could be influencing Sleep Token's portrayal of God. Later medieval reinterpretations of Neoplatonism in the mystical practice of Jewish Kabbalah and the broader Western esoteric movements also depict God in a similar way. These traditions were largely based around the mythology of the Abrahamic pantheon, which are also represented within Sleep Token's music. Based on this, I think it's reasonable to conclude that Sleep Token is basing their lore's cosmology, ontology, and philosophy of the origins of sleep based on blending of a Greco-Roman, Abrahamic, European-centric mythological perspective. Within these traditions, the idea is that the transcendent God makes himself known to people through emanating himself into our material world. These emanations are a reflection of the God above, but are further away, still in the essence of the God above them, but separated. The further away from the singularity of God above, the more accessible that entity is to people, but it is also less truly God. That is to say, in these traditions, when you're talking to God, you aren't really talking to a big G God, but rather a representative of God speaking on his behalf. I think this is key to understanding one of the biggest questions around sleep's identity. In the interviews, sleep is always referred to as a he, but in the songs, Vessel is mostly singing to and about a she. In my theory, sleep is a higher deity, closer to the source of emanation. He's still very transcendent and doesn't actually communicate with Vessel, but rather communicates with Vessel through a lower entity, more material and accessible to Vessel's human mind. You may say there are two versions of sleep at play, a greater sleep and a lesser sleep, the former being a he and the later being a she. Chapter 2. Sleep as a Personification of Death. In Kabbalah, when you're sleeping, it's said that you're experiencing 1/16 of death. It's thought that when we sleep, our souls leave our bodies and can travel into other realms of existence to receive messages and experience deeper truths of reality. In this philosophy, when we're sleeping, we're experiencing a soul separation of our bodies that will be a similarly permanent state of soul separation and death. First, I want to talk about the comic. In The Teeth of God, in the last letter from the director, he explicitly says sleep is death. It goes on to describe how the eldritch monster emerging from the moon seems to be going around to different solar systems and eating planets, killing the life on those planets, turning anything that survives into a servant, and moves on to the next planet. This moon god anomaly is separate from the various monsters created on the planet, representing the 12 songs from the Take Me Back to Eden album. In Chapter 3, the director's letter mentions that these monsters are not consistent with the nature of the main anomaly, fighting each other and being just generally violent. They're shown killing and transforming any life that comes into contact with them. It's unclear to the director what their motives are. He calls it an endless dance of ceaseless struggle. There are a few mentions of gods in Sleep Token's songs, and I believe it is a reference to these creatures, who I would categorize as the lesser sleep emanations of differentiated aspects of the greater sleep, like I mentioned before. These gods likely personify various attributes under the larger umbrella of the domain of death. Classifying these creatures as servants of a higher entity could be similar to the idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, being conquest, war, famine, and death. These 4 serve a god above them, but have their own distinct roles to play in ushering in the world's demise. They all act independently from each other, but work towards the same ends. Many of the lyrics within Sleep Token discuss death and destruction. Towards the beginning of the discography, there's talk of biting and eating, destruction, and going below, with the later albums talking about the end, the abyss, fire, and being cold. Although sleep, dreams, and nightmares are mentioned explicitly around 26 times, death and topics around death are mentioned much more frequently overall. Based on my analysis of the lyrics, I think Vessel isn't simply a victim of the greater sleep, but is actively serving him. In my next video about Vessel, I will go into more detail about this, but for now I want to show you some specific examples where themes of death aren't simply mentioned, but are explicitly referring to the nature and actions of Vessel and the lesser sleep he is working with. Vessel and sleep run with death. Everything Vessel and sleep touches turns water into blood. Vessel and sleep are provoked by their prey. Each time Vessel and sleep battle, the blood and the fury takes them a little higher. You're a mine till the sweat turns to blood. Vessel and sleep have an instinct to kill. Vessel and Sleep balance fire, and the earth they walk. Loving what I think might be the greater sleep is a blood sport. In telomeres, it even sounds like they might be working through death. Finally, they acknowledge that they are walking beside death in Arcadia when they're with each other. Most of these verses are phrased as we and are, meaning that they both participate in these actions, at least according to the narrator. Finally, the interludes from the Teeth of God European Tour in 2024 explicitly talk about death, the fear of death, and the nature of death, often in somewhat conflicting descriptions. Briefly, the interludes describe death as a nothingness that drowns us, eating us alive, that death must be something that exists on the other side, but also it must be final and not transcendent to give life meaning. Death provides us with the darkness against which we all glow defiantly. Death is a color. Death is a fabric. Death is merely another weapon wielded by the great adversary. And Vessel urges to let death bring you hope in one hand and fear in another. It's asking you to dance with both, after all. Again, Glen Joseph Robinson did a great job explaining all of the interludes, so I'll link that video in the description box below if you're interested in their details. Based on this evidence, I'm proposing that the greater sleep is a god of death, controlling the domain of death, with Vessel and these lesser entities serving him as various expressions or functions of death. Chapter 3. Sleep as the Angel of Death. In the Abrahamic pantheon, the lesser spiritual beings are angels. These are the creatures that communicate with humans both in their dreams and while they're awake, appearing as both beautiful and terrifying. The Hebrew word for angel literally means messenger, meaning these angels speak on behalf of their God who sent them. There are examples where angels are sent to speak to someone by the Hebrew God, being identified as an angel of Yahweh. Then later, the entity is speaking as if they were Yahweh, like when Moses is talking to the angel in the burning bush, or when Abraham is talking to the three strangers. Because of the way the angels are referred to by God's name, it's confusing narratively who is actually speaking in those stories. I think this is similar to how the greater sleep and the lesser sleep could be using the same name, sleep, because I think these lesser sleep entities are acting and speaking on behalf of the greater sleep. Because the prominence of the Reaper Angel monster in the Teeth of God comic and its heavy use in Sleep Token's promotional material and merch, I think this angel from the Take Me Back to Eden song is one of the 12 lesser sleep monsters that is the entity speaking through Vessel in the music, using the falsetto whispers and screaming styles of singing. I'm proposing that Vessel is in a romantic relationship with this Reaper Angel, one of the angels of death. In the Teeth of God comic, we're introduced to the Reaper Angel in Chapter 3, Blessings. It emerges from what looks like to be a tree of tendrils inside a church behind the pulpit. When it touches people, it turns them into flying monsters resembling a mechanical winged insect. Later in Chapter 4, it offers the director an opportunity to become submerged with it. There's so much to talk about with this chapter of the comic that I plan on making an entirely separate video about this and the music that complements it. But for now, I just want to reference the comic as evidence that the Reaper Angel, although created by the moon anomaly, is acting independently from it. Although I believe Vessel and this Angel of Death serve the greater sleep, I still think that they're their own people with their own desires and make their own choices. I think separating sleep into two distinct entities like this answers a major issue within the fandom around why, in one song, Vessel seems completely in love with sleep, and in the next, he's very angry and wanting to leave sleep. I think it's because he's talking about two different entities. In later videos, I'll go into more detail as to why I think Vessel is so angry with the greater sleep and is trying to revolt against him in partnership with this angelic version of the lesser sleep, but more to come on that later. Some of the evidence from the lyrics to support that the lesser sleep is one of the angels of death serving the greater sleep are: she could have killed Vessel in his sleep, but chose not to. Sleep's name is a sin or like a curse on this world, and she calls herself the final dawn and the flood. Sleep's addicted to pain and has said to have wings and is once even called an angel. And maybe she's the only good girl this side of the moon, because the moon is referring to the greater sleep, and she is the entity that Vessel's working with on this side of the moon. I also believe that Vessel's sleep is something of a fallen angel, because there's evidence that this angel exists separately from the other servants of the greater sleep. First, in the Teeth of God comic, the Reaper Angel acts more independently than the other monsters. While the other entities are on the platforms near the moon anomaly, the Reaper Angel emerges somewhere else, from the water below, and pulls the director underneath the water with her, potentially saving him as they embrace each other before they go under together. After this happens, the moon anomaly eats the planet. There's also considerable evidence from the lyrics suggesting that Vessel's sleep was banished from heaven and lives in the underworld. Sleep and Vessel are together when they are under or if Vessel is buried or falling. Sleep is water or lives underwater, or Vessel is being pulled underwater to be asleep. It sounds like she lives in a setting that sounds a lot like hell, that she was born in hell or sent from heaven, or was raised in the dark. God doesn't seem to remember Sleep's name, and Sleep is not where the gods or the angels are. And in a few songs, it sounds very explicitly that she was banished from heaven. If this Reaper Angel was banished from heaven for some reason, it isn't clear to me yet what this reason was, but I suspect it has something to do with her love of Vessel. Although she isn't currently living in heaven, there is evidence that she desires to return there with Vessel, and that they are scheming together to make it happen. I'll dive further into this theory in a future video, so stay tuned for that. Finally, let's look over the data showing what this angel communicates to Vessel the majority of the time when the falsetto, whispering, or the screaming voice is singing. Here I'm showing you the top 40% of Sleep's verses counted when she is talking to Vessel. As an angelic messenger, we're told that Sleep primarily talks to Vessel by visiting him through his dreams. In these dreams or dreamlike states, Sleep expresses to Vessel her wants through begging and enticing him, especially earlier in the discography, and later communicates more by asking him questions in the later two albums. In earlier albums, she discusses destruction, the night and darkness, laying down, being excited, eternity, being abandoned, possession, needing to understand, and what she doesn't want. In later albums, she talks about the journey, things above, knowing, the past, time, and water. In all the albums, she frequently discusses things repeating, love of Vessel, things beneath, being together, biting, communication, and seeing. In addition to talking to Vessel, I believe there are instances where she and Vessel talk directly to God, without getting a response, of course. Sleep rarely talks to God, but when she does, she talks about communication, what she doesn't want, how she will make things better, love, having demands, needing things to end, and coercion. I'll dive more into these topics in future videos, but wanted to give you a preview of the overall data. Later, if we have time to go through each of the albums, we will be able to see the patterns of the development of Sleep's mindset and how it relates to her relationship with Vessel over time. Chapter 4: Flamingos the Phoenix. Although I will go into much more detail about the timeline of events in a future video, a brief explanation is warranted here. I believe the first two EPs is where Vessel meets the Lesser Sleep and enters into a relationship with her. Then, the following three albums is a trilogy exploring how it's hard for Vessel to be separated from her. Finally, at the end of Take Me Back to Eden, Vessel uses his own power to summon Sleep back to him. They do some rituals, and then they end up going back to Eden. During this time, I think Vessel's sleep appears to him as an angel, as I discussed in the previous chapter. But after the events of Euclid, when he wakes up in Arcadia, I think Vessel's sleep is now represented by the black flamingo Jerry. Like the angel before, Jerry is very prominent in the promotional materials and merch for both the album and the tour of Even in Arcadia. Let's look at some of the clues in the coin puzzle from the US Even in Arcadia tour from 2025. Inspired by the great work done on the Sleep Token Discord led by Salamander27, I'd like to share with you some of my own tinfoil theories on the transformation of Lesser Sleep from an angel into a flamingo. For more details about this picture specifically, let me know in the comments below if you'd like a deep dive into this in a future video. First, the ominous threatening moon is still present on the right, with Vessel bowing to the black flamingo to the left. Everything seems to be pulling Vessel towards the right as he struggles to stay in place in front of the flamingo. According to the sources below, flamingos represent resistance because they can survive in a variety of harsh climates, as well as transformation and rebirth cycles. And because of this, they may even be the bird that influenced the Egyptian and Greek myths around the phoenix. If it was the intention of Sleep Token to make a connection between the flamingo and the phoenix, then that would also correspond nicely to the burning house Viridian banners represented in each of the music videos of the new album Even in Arcadia, burning down the established order to make space for the rebirth and transformation promoted by the feathered host. I also found an interesting connection between the Phoenix and Eden, or Arcadia as we're calling it now. There's a Talmudic story about how all the other animals in the garden ate the forbidden fruit offered to them by Eve, except the phoenix. Because of its obedience, the phoenix was allowed to stay in the garden and was granted immortality. Maybe this lesser sleep was one of the Phoenix Flamingos originally, but was banished later for some reason. Maybe Vessel's sleep is disguised as a flamingo while she is in Arcadia because she was banished and needs to look different as she travels through a place she isn't welcome. Because flamingos receive their coloration from what they eat, Jerry's likely a black flamingo because she has been feeding on darkness, living outside of Eden for so long. So does that mean Vessel's in a romantic relationship with a bird now? In Greek mythology, that wasn't completely out of the question. According to these sources, apparently spindly birds were closely associated with female desire. You can read a whole scientific article about it, Girl with a Heron, Gender and the Erotic in Greek Iconography, and you can see some examples of that here. Additionally, sirens, the winged bird ladies, are famously known to seduce men with their singing, and even have some associations with fallen angels. Finally, the scythe weapon used by the Take Me Back to Eden Reaper angel are represented in the Even in Arcadia crest with Jerry. And as you can see in the picture, around Vessel and Jerry lie what looks to be the weapons of their fallen foes, but no scythe is to be seen. Is it because the scythe is a weapon of the Reaper angel disguised as Jerry? I'm sure we'll learn more about this new lore as Sleep Token releases new songs and puzzles for us to solve. Chapter 5. Sleep as a Dark Goddess. The next theory about the identity of sleep that I would like to explore is that she is a goddess, particularly representing a combination of various dark goddesses. Here, I'll briefly share with you some of the similarities I found between the lore around sleep and some of the known goddess archetypes. Bear with me as this is a very surface level introduction, especially so for those pantheons for which I am less familiar. Because Vessel is pulling some of his lore from the Abrahamic pantheon, let's start with his chief goddess, Asherah. Although the Abrahamic religions have been monotheistic for millennia, it hasn't always been the case. A major conflict recorded in the Bible between the northern and southern tribes of Israel was over their dispute about strict monotheism. King Josiah fought to reform the Israelite religion and remove any trace of polytheism and practices around Asherah worship more specifically. Although Asherah isn't particularly dark, because of this conflict, she was ultimately rejected as a false idol when monotheism overtook Israelite theology. When she was cast into exile, she became associated with some darker aspects, including judging the sensual nature of her temple worship as immoral. Historically, she was the divine queen, a mother of all the living, being associated with trees and sacred groves, sexuality, spinning and weaving, and the sea. In present-day Abrahamic religions, her spiritual successor can be found represented as the Shekinah for the Jews and the Holy Spirit for Christians. Some associations with this spiritual version of Asherah are the earth itself, the presence of God on earth, life, breath, and wind, transformation and fire, purification and water, and the personification of wisdom. Some of the references in the lyrics that correspond with traits attributed to Asherah or her spirit include being called a godmother in Take Me Back to Eden, trees, apples, fertile gardens, oceans, storms, and floods, rain and rivers for transformation or cleansing, holy water, wind, breath, and life, wisdom through discovery and experience, and transformation more generally. One last similarity I would like to bring up in this section is the similarities between the song Alkaline and the Gnostic poem Thunder Perfect Mind, speaking to the nature of the Holy Spirit. It describes the divine feminine as a paradox, embodying two seemingly opposing forces, inviting us to take on their power to understand the divinity within ourselves. Vessel describes sleep in a similarly paradoxical way in Alkaline. I'll leave the poem for you to explore on your own, but if you'd like me to do a deeper dive into this, let me know in the comments below. Another ancient dark feminine archetype from the Abrahamic pantheon resembling sleep is Lilith. She isn't as much of a goddess as she is a primordial energy, but she is an entity feared for millennia. Her Talmudic story as Adam's first wife in Eden, turned mother of demons, combines the story of anti-patriarchy and feminine independence with the region's mythology around the night demons of Lamashtu, Lilitu, and Lamia. Some of her traits similar to the way sleep is described are being associated with the night, a beautiful woman who has adult fun time with men in their sleep, causing nocturnal emissions, sucks the blood of male victims in their sleep or eats them alive, independence and freedom from tyranny, was banished from the Garden of Eden, has wings, and she's also associated with miscarriages. Next is Kali from the Hindu pantheon, one of the most powerful and well-known of the dark goddesses. I'm not at all familiar with the details around Kali, but from her Wikipedia page, some of her characteristics that correspond with sleep include how she controls time, associated with death and destruction, thirst for blood, associated with the night, liberating transcendent knowledge, personified wrath and embodied fury, battles demons, and is the energy powering the universe. Finally, two major aspects of sleep that hasn't yet been shared by the previous goddesses was the recurring theme of pain and silence. I was able to find a Celtic goddess adopted by the Romans, a little-known goddess, Angeronia. Her name could be translated as choking, anguish, or death. Her statue was found in the temple of Volopia, the goddess of pleasure. Here are some song references that are attributed to sleep that are similar to characteristics ascribed to Angeronia. Pain, anguish, and sorrow, finding pleasure within pain, silence, keeper of secrets, and the winter solstice, and darkness. There are other goddesses that share characteristics attributed to sleep, but for now, I'll leave you with those four to ponder. Again, I don't think sleep has a direct one-to-one relationship with any particular goddess. Vessel may be pulling inspiration from various archetypes shared by many of the dark goddesses. Chapter 6. Sleep as Vessel's Anima. So far, we've been discussing the mythological aspects of sleep token lore, who the characters are in a greater, extrinsic, cosmic story happening around Vessel. Another way to interpret the music is how sleep relates to Vessel intrinsically, as an aspect of his own psyche. The evidence of them being created as part of the same whole are throughout their songs, but are specifically alluded to in Mine, Chokehold, Alkaline, and Telomeres. There are many great videos exploring how sleep token may be an elaborate metaphor for Jungian psychology. I'll link a few of those deep dive videos in the description box below. In brief, every person's psyche has conscious and unconscious aspects that inform who they are. The goal of Jungian psychology is to integrate these aspects through individuation to become a whole self and reach one's fullest potential. There are different archetypes that make up the conscious and unconscious aspects of the self. The ego is where our consciousness and awareness reside, like the place where your own thoughts come from. The ego takes all the sensory inputs around it, interprets them, considers them, and makes decisions in order to understand what it is experiencing outside of it. It's the part of the self that interacts with the collective consciousness existing within the material world. The anima and animus is the soul of a person that structures one's inner world. It's the essence of a person's true self, emotions, and passions, giving someone's life meaning and purpose. This part of an individual functions autonomously from their consciousness, but it is projected subconsciously in dreams and onto other people to make itself known when the ego isn't yet aware of its existence. It's the part of the self that is connected to the spiritual world and the collective unconscious. The idea is when we're born, our conscious ego and unconscious animus or anima is completely unified. Over time, as the ego develops to make sense of the external world around it, it loses that unity with the anima in two major ways. One is through the development of the persona. The persona is an identity consciously created by a person to be accepted by their specific community and society in general. It's a mask people put on themselves to display to others an idea of what they think they should be, what society wants them to be. It also serves to hide one's true self as a means of protection against shame. It's the filter through which a person presents themselves to the collective consciousness of society. The second is the accumulation of unconscious shadow. The shadow becomes the shameful parts of a person's true self that they resist and ignore, repressing ideas, weaknesses, and desires opposed to cultural expectations or one's own personal morals and values. The persona is inherently opposed to the shadow as it functions to hide those undesired aspects of self. Many of a person's maladaptive emotional reactions to situations are rooted in fear of exposure of the shadow. The persona and the shadow around the ego and the anima separate them. The journey of individuation is the effort to remove the persona and integrate the shadows to become one's true, authentic self again. In relation to sleep token lore, the theory is that Vessel is the ego and sleep is his anima. From this perspective, the narrative is about Vessel's relationship with his anima and how he deals with the persona and shadows preventing him from being close to her. Less explicitly is where the greater sleep fits into this. Is the god Sleep a representation of the one within the collective unconsciousness, as it is in Jungian psychology? Or is he a false god, an egregore created by the collective consciousness? For now, I'll leave you with that question to ponder. But let me know in the comments below if you're particularly interested in me making a video about this topic, and I can do some more research into it. In the next video about Vessel, I'll dive more deeply into the persona because it's more closely related to the ego. For now, let's look at some of the lyrical evidence around Sleep being Vessel's anima and how the shadows surrounding her contribute to the story. Here are some references in songs related to Sleep being an integral, inseparable part of Vessel. They were created together, Vessel's desire to become one with Sleep, Sleep is Vessel's missing pieces, Vessel becomes one with Sleep temporarily, and Vessel cannot live apart from Sleep. One extra bit of information I need to add now that we're here is that I left out 2 of the singing styles that I mentioned in the method section. All throughout the discography, there are a lot of background noises, like crying, moaning, and wailing, often without any words associated with it. There's also a very low-pitched, echoing voice that says short phrases and words, often emphasizing what is being said by the main singer. These 2 singing styles I assign to the shadow having a voice of itself. When you go back and listen for it, it can be unsettling how frequently shadow and fear attaches itself to the background of the songs. When it does speak, it talks about what it hates, what it wants, commanding and enticing Vessel, eternity, loss, and pain. Another nuance I want to bring up about the singing styles is that I qualitatively ranked the singing styles of Sleep and Shadow, and theorized that the Shadow could have more influence over Sleep depending on how Sleep was singing. I ranked it from falsetto unmodified, falsetto modified, whispers, then screaming, which means I think if Sleep is screaming, she is heavily influenced by Shadow and the fears associated with what she's saying when she's screaming. There are many references throughout the discography to the fears held by Sleep and Vessel, individually and collectively. Here are some of the ones that I could find. Together, they both mention they're afraid of being alone, being forgotten or lost, being trapped, just existing, or being vulnerable. Vessel specifically seems to be afraid of being unimportant, being left behind. He's afraid that Sleep doesn't want him, leaving God, losing control, or that he won't be forgiven. And Sleep seems to be afraid of Vessel discovering the truth about her past, being lied to, not being worthy, change, not being able to be with Vessel, and being misunderstood. As the story continues, I think Vessel is slowly addressing the fears surrounding Sleep and allowing them to heal the shadows. To really do it justice, I would have to go through each album to demonstrate to you the progression Vessel and Sleep take together from the beginning of the EPs through the end of Even in Arcadia. And if there's time and interest, I may go back and do that. Let me know in the comments below if this is something that you'd like. In conclusion, based on my analysis of the lyrics, interviews, and interludes, I believe that Sleep cannot be described as one definitive thing, but spans multiple roles in the larger narrative of Sleep token lore. I think there is evidence that Sleep can be interpreted in both a mythological sense and in a psychological sense. First, I think there is a greater Sleep, who is the masculine expression of a god described by Vessel in the early interviews. I think this is the entity that Vessel is worshipping at the rituals, and the entity that has the most control, exerting its will over its servants below it. In polytheism, there isn't one god, but several gods that have domain over various powers. Based on the evidence we looked at today, I'm proposing that the domain of God Sleep is death. However, like in many religions, the transcendent god of Sleep might not be the entity Vessel is directly engaging with. It's possible that he's working with one of Sleep's messengers to the material world. This lesser Sleep could be seen by Vessel as an angel or a goddess, or maybe a little of both. I suppose when you're dealing with a powerful spiritual entity, it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between an angel and a goddess. She may even be a goddess of the subdomains of death spanning silence, pain, and transformation. If you agree that there's a significance to splitting the song lyrics between the different singing styles and assigning them to different roles, I believe the relationship between Vessel and the lesser Sleep is mutual. I think she genuinely loves Vessel, but is dealing with a lot of fear around being unified with Vessel and her increasing reluctance to serve the greater Sleep. From the dark goddess archetypes we looked at, there's evidence that although the lesser Sleep is required to serve the greater Sleep, she has been banished from heaven for some reason and lives in the underworld. In later videos in this series, I'll explore the evidence supporting the theory that she and Vessel feel betrayed by the greater Sleep and that they are plotting their own ascension to deification outside of their patron god. If you're interested in these videos, please subscribe so you'll be able to see them when they come out. The relationship between Vessel and the 2 versions of Sleep are also mirrored in the psychological interpretation of the lore. In this theory, Vessel represents the conscious ego, with the lesser sleep representing the unconscious anima. In this sense, the story could be interpreted as Vessel's battle against his persona and shadow, the two elements preventing him from being unified with his beloved anima. In this interpretation, Vessel also needs to wrestle with how he relates to God and his desire to feel whole again. Will Vessel find wholeness in his unification with God, or with his unification with his anima? Is the god sleep a projection of the needs of society, or is he a benevolent, all-powerful source of love? Again, I'll be diving deeper into these questions in future videos. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the identity of sleep. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.